This episode of the Bench Ass Shirt podcast is brought to you by Sean with socks stuffed in his mouth and his head inside a metal lunchbox. Because for some reason, the other podcast host failed to mention that I was using the wrong microphone. So I apologize for my terrible audio, but thankfully I'm not the one talking a whole lot this week. That is Ben. Yeah, so I'm Sean Powers. And I'm not the host, but I'm here. And today, Ben is going to deep dive on something. But more importantly than Ben, more important than Ben, today we are drinking. Ben, why don't you tell us? Because it's your fault. I mean, it's your.
Ben. This is Loganberry soda, which is not really like soda. I described it in our initial talk as like Kool-Aid, which got Sean all excited. He's like, Kool-Aid? I've never heard of this Kool-Aid. What's this flavor of Kool-Aid I've never heard of? But it's not Kool-Aid. It's Loganberry. And
it's weird. The bottom of the can specifically like emphasizes non-carbonated.
Oh yeah, no, they're like, this is not carbonated. Nowhere does it indicate that it's not caffeinated, but it's not caffeinated.
Okay.
Did we do any deep dive into who Aunt Rosie is?
Ooh, I don't have the slightest idea who Aunt Rosie is. There are two competing brands. This is a stuff you can really only get in Western New York. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple other places where they might have it, but there are actually two competing brands of it. So,
I hope you sent us the good stuff.
I don't know that there's a discernible difference.
Okay. Well, let's go. Let's open it.
All right, let's do it.
And I brought a glass because the color should be enjoyed and appreciated, like a fine vintage wine.
I have a drop on the outside of my can, so I'm going to enjoy that.
Purple syrupness of it.
Wow. I'm just going to drink it out of the can, but do you want to know my can trick? This is like a college thing. So I always put a dent right there, like when I'm drinking, so that I know that it's my can, but it's a dual purpose thing. Have I told you this? I feel like I tell the same things to people. So I always dent it right there, right below where the little hole is in the top. And it's so that I always know it's mine. But also, if it's an alcoholic beverage, regardless of how many you drink, if you put your thumb there, it lines up with your mouth. Wow, that is...
I was wondering where that was going to go.
That... You know what
that is the fine flavor of a Loganberry, my good friend.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
It's if you have a Freezy Pop thing and you let it melt.
Yes,
that's the juice.
That is exactly what it is. I like it more than the Peeps Pepsi. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, low bar, but yeah.
That's I have a few of these every year, usually in the summer. They're good with a hot dog and a burger. When you've really given up on like personal health.
Yeah. I think we have the closest we would have to this is those little plastic barrel things of juice with like the foil top.
Oh yeah.
Or something.
Capri Sun? What are you talking about?
Yes.
No, a hug. They're plastic, translucent, like and they come in not flavors so much as colors. Like what flavor is it? Blue.
Right.
And it's a similar type of vintage.
That kind of vintage, that kind of acidic chemical burn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like we want to make it taste like juice. You want to use juice? No. Get some acetic acid from somewhere. And just add that. It's not bad, Ben. It reminds me of the icy pop things, like and the juice left in the bottom.
Right, and when the icy pop melts, that's a good. And the hug as well. I didn't think of the little hugs. Does Daniel not know what the little hugs are?
I do not know a little hug, but the icy pop feels like a very good comparison.
Okay. Yeah. So what a hug is, it's basically melted icy pop.
They come in these little plastic jugs, and they're like a nickel a pop.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you're dating us. They're probably like $1.50 each. But yeah. Value-wise, though,
they were famous for being inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and famous for being all sugar, and they were never allowed in my house growing up.
Yeah, the lids are the peel-off foil, like you peel off the foil lid.
Yeah.
Or if you're fancy, you can like poke holes in it and like drink it through the little hole you poked. Oh yeah.
Fancy. Yeah.
Right.
It's a strong word there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, white trash fancy.
Hey, I still get a kick out of puncturing a boba lid, so I hear that.
All right, I think that
Is
might
that
be
is that a West Coast thing?
No, I think that just might be middle class version of the pierced hug.
I don't know. I don't know that you can. Is that like something you buy boba at the grocery store and it's got a lid?
No, there's boba shops. So you actually there's
I just thought it came in
seal
a
it.
big plastic cup, like a star, like a
Mhm,
you get it anywhere.
Yeah, the real shops though, they seal the top with like a
Exactly.
plastic that with like a heat press, and it
There's
like
a whole
seals
machine.
it. And then they as they serve it, they're like it's
It's like DQ, but just in drink
like
form.
DQ, but
Look,
Yeah.
we
it's
can
a
turn it
lid.
upside down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Does that
I've
ever
only-
fail? I would like
I've
to. I
never
would like to
seen
see
it
them be
fail.
like whoop whoop.
Yeah.
Just-
No. Yeah, it's like next to like the pretzels in the mall, there'll be a boba shop kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
we saw
I
one.
don't think
We
we have
were in
those.
Florida. That's the only time we've ever seen one in real life is in Florida.
I mean,
And
we
it
have
was at a
boba
mall.
restaurants, ramen restaurants, and they sell boba tea and stuff, but I haven't seen the flip over cup.
Oh
We
yeah.
have a boba tea shop opening this summer in downtown Petoskey.
Nice.
Cool.
So yeah.
I was I mentioned Petoskey to my friend at dinner the other night, and because I was talking about the bookstore, and she was like, "Oh, where is it?" I'm like, "Oh, it's way up in northern Michigan. This place called Petoskey." She goes, "I know Petoskey." I'm like, "What the? How?"
Wow.
But apparently, she lived in Central Michigan when she was younger, and so she knew about.
If you live in Michigan, you most likely know of Petoskey, largely because of the stones. Petoskey stones, they're like the famous.
Mhm.
Do you know about Petoskey stones?
Like a
You've
knockoff
talked
of
about it.
Rolling
I still haven't
Stones.
seen them, but like
No,
holes in
no.
them, right?
Yeah, they're fossils because
Yeah.
Michigan used to all be like millions and millions of years ago was an ocean, and they are the fossils of a long since extinct coral, and they still wash up on shore of the Great Lakes every year, and you can go to the shore and find them. And I
These
guess I
are
don't.
stones with holes in them.
No, they're not holes. But the coral is like round, so they're like
Pitted.
little hexagons kind of put
Pitted?
together. Like
Yeah,
people,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
Not a lot going on in Michigan, huh?
Not a lot, no, but yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Have
I don't
you
know why I
been
felt
here?
the need to
Yeah.
crap on Michigan there because of their
We
fossils.
have Verners. That's it.
When I visit, I'm going to come and hopefully find a few. And then instead of fidgeting with like all the different things I have around my desk, I'm just going to basically, like you said, like you shake it up and sort of smooth it out so that it
You have to
starts
use. You have to do it by hand. You have to use sandpaper because you
Great.
can't put it in a rock tumbler. They're too soft. They'll just crumble.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
sandpaper.
a different kind of fidgeting during a meeting, but I'll get some sandpaper out. It'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Gotta be careful.
You got to make
If you
sure you're
can't find
careful
them-
where your hands are.
They're
Yeah.
hard to find in the water. It takes it's like an acquired skill to find them because they're difficult to see, but gift shops have them all over and they're not terribly expensive. Or I mean, if you come to Petoskey, I have a lot better just in my yard. You can have them.
Fantastic.
The previous owners collected them and put them around the house, like to ward off evil spirits, like seriously. And so there's like,
Ah.
yeah.
What if you want evil spirits? I don't,
You got to move next door to me because all mine are
pushed
moved out.
over there.
Yeah.
All right, good to know.
Yeah.
Sign me up. I'm looking up Zillow right now.
There are many reasons to not want to be my neighbor. I guess one more is fine.
All
so
right.
then it's your turn.
Mhm.
I mean,
It is my turn.
Let's
I
do
think
it.
the Loganberry is a win, though. I'm not like offended. It's not like Pepsi Peeps or anything. It's
No.
I'm going to drink this whole can.
It's it's like all sodas. It's better out of the fountain than the can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's
But
better.
I read it in the glass. I like your tactic, but no, it's definitely it's a thumbs up for me. I like it.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. We're very proud of.
One last question before you deep dive on this stuff. Are there local cocktails based on Loganberry?
So, I once saw someone put up a recipe for a Loganberry margarita, which turned out good. I tried. I was like, I'm gonna make that because I got some Loganberry in the garage, and that was good.
Okay.
It's just like a margarita with Loganberry added in, so it's
Okay.
just a little bit Loganberry, but the citrus really helped. But I did the other day. I was at my buddy's place, and he had a bottle of from a local distillery Loganberry vodka.
Oh.
Which
Wow.
I wanted to pick up and find and get it and try, but I didn't get a chance yet.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I saw Punchki vodka.
Punchki?
Interesting. Well, okay, you plebe. Yeah, it's Punchki. But yeah.
Punchki. I think it's Punchki.
I grew up in Detroit in like the Polish center of immigrant capital of whatever.
We literally, they wean you on kielbasa in Western New York. It's just,
I think we do live kind of close to each other. So I feel like
I mean, I had pierogi before I had milk.
pierogi, roll your R, you
Oh
just
my
you
God.
horrible human.
Oh,
Pierogi.
Uh,
Glomki. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. All right. On that note, I've ruined the podcast. But
wait, do you guys do that after Easter holiday, where you smack the women with the pussy willow branches?
no, I haven't been a part of that one yet.
Yeah, booyah.
That one didn't migrate from New York to Detroit.
No, that's an upstate New York. That didn't migrate downstate either.
I'm not making any of that up. There was a great sequence of Anderson Cooper on CNN where he learned about it, and he just falls apart laughing on camera as he learns more and more details about that holiday. This weird, obscure Eastern European holiday that for some reason celebrated heavily in Buffalo.
I feel like you have sent a link to that, possibly when we all work together in the company Slack. I think, yeah.
And if you come
Dingus
across
Day, that's
it,
what it's called. I always forget the name.
What is it called?
Dingus Day, spelled with a Y. D-Y-N.
Of course, it's called Dingus Day.
I didn't want to search for Slack. I remember
slapping women with pussy willows. So thank you. That'll be much safer search.
Come on, have some fun. Live a little.
I mean, Dingus not that much safer, but a little bit. So Ben, top that. I mean,
yeah, educate us, Ben.
Educate us. All right. So here's the thing. This is what we all know. I know Sean's got my back. Is that the English language is being very explicitly destroyed by the youth of America. They're ruining the language. They're killing it. They're forgetting about the rules of grammar. They are spelling words with just letters like LOL and ROFL, and they are using pictures that they call emojis, right? And I have a few choice quotes here, actually, from some people who say it better than me. The first one, this is from a woman named Marie Claire from the Plain English campaign, who wrote, "Their language is deteriorating," they're being the teenagers. "They are lowering the bar. Our language is flying off at all tangents without the anchor of a solid foundation." Now, she's a British woman. She was speaking about British English, but if you're concerned with a more domestic approach, Douglas Rushkoff from an op-ed in the New York Times wrote, "Without grammar, we lose the agreed upon standards about what means what. We lose the ability to communicate when respondents are not actually in the same room, speaking to one another. Without grammar, we lose the precision required to be effective and purposeful in writing." Or Jay Mersand, Attitudes Towards English. And, well, okay, this is 1961, but he wrote, "Recent graduates, including those with a university degree, seem to have no mastery of the language at all. They cannot construct a simple declarative sentence, either orally or in writing. They cannot spell common everyday words. Punctuation is apparently no longer taught. Grammar is a complete mystery to almost all recent graduates."
He would be shocked today.
1961, right?
Yeah.
Here's one: "Language is today so quickly transformed that it has become decayed and rotten. Ineptitude and sluggishness, bombast, foppery, and grammatical errors are increasing." Yes,
I'm sorry, can you say that one again?
That was
it specifically the foppery?
"Ineptitude and sluggishness, bombast, foppery, and grammatical errors are increasing." Sounds a little strange. The writer there was a man named Gustav Wussmann, who is German, if you couldn't tell. So, maybe something was lost in translation. Also, he wrote that in 1891.
I like the idea that I had to ask you to repeat something that I didn't quite understand as you were talking about the language deteriorating.
James Beattie wrote, "Our language is degenerating very fast." That was in 1785. Jonathan Swift, "From the Civil War to this present time, I am apt to doubt whether the corruptions in our language have not at least equaled the refinements of it. And these corruptions, very few of the best authors of our age have wholly escaped." That was
Jonathan
1710.
Swift? Yeah, Jonathan Swift.
1710.
Oddly, a very slow man, as it turns
And my favorite example here is a monk named Ranulf Higden from the 14th century, who wrote, by intermingling and mixing first with Danes and afterwards with Normans. In many people, the language of the land is harmed, and some use strange, inarticulate utterance, chattering, snarling, and harsh teeth gnashing. Which, again, being written in the 14th century, was originally written in Middle English. And I looked up the original copy of it, and it is completely illegible to modern audiences. So
I
if
almost,
you couldn't
yeah,
tell,
I was hoping that you were going to get to the monk and just look at us sternly. And the monk said,
apparently, our language has been deteriorating for hundreds of years.
I was hoping for like some original Canterbury Tales being,
I found
orated by
someone
Ben.
who cited a clay tablet from ancient Sumeria. I'm not making this up. I found it online when I was looking these up. A clay tablet from ancient Sumeria, a scholar lamenting, to paraphrase, that the Utes of the day were ruining language and they didn't know how to do it. So apparently, for as long as we've had writing and speaking, this problem has been going on.
Since as long as there have been lawns to get off of.
Yeah. So hopefully it's clear at this point that I don't actually believe in this.
I was going to say, I like how you set up ridiculous. Like, Sean, you have my back. You're a horrible human. You'll go along with all of these things. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, mixing with Danes and Normans. I mean,
the view of the bus is great. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. Like in 63 AD, the people at the time used to complain that the kids were ruining Latin, turning into vulgar Latin. But those were the Gauls of Central Europe, which of course turned into what we call French today. And there's a whole government academy, the Académie Française, dedicated to preserving that language as it is. So it used to be terrible. Now it's French, right? Like this is constantly going on. But you would say, Ben, it's different today. Now we have the internet, and now we've got emojis and text, and this is just a whole new world. Kids are so lazy, they're replacing words with smiley faces. But it turns out that's not what's going on. It's pretty cool what is going on. And I've been reading a whole lot about it recently, and I think it's pretty neat. So, first, a couple of side tangents. One is about informal language. So, broadly speaking, our language, in particular our writing, falls into two kind of categories: formal and informal. Right? And the formal language is what we write when we write letters and plays and screenplays and books and all those things. And the informal language is kind of what we use when we're just like talking to our family in the living room, right? And they're two very different forms of communication. They sound different. We use words differently. That's very, very different sort of thing. And you can even see that like on this podcast. I'm certain of it. If you were to compare before Sean started recording to after he started recording, you would see a very distinct difference.
It's difficult to find both types of footage because Sean so often forgets to press record.
There's that as well. A salient point, actually, to where I'm headed with this, believe it or not, because for all of human history, there's not really been a whole lot of recorded informal communication because it's hard to record communication. For a long time, you needed expensive materials, whether they were clay tablets or vellum or whatever medium they were writing on, and ink. And that's assuming it was even durable enough to last more than a few years or a few centuries before it fell apart. So the stuff that survived today is stuff that people really put a lot of time and effort and energy and revising and editing and all these things into. When you commit it to a letter, when you commit it to a screenplay, it's gone through this very sort of inspective process before it gets all the way down there. And we just don't have a lot of informal communication. There was a guy named Edmond in France around 1900 who was trying to collect some informal communication. He was curious if the proliferation of the printing press had sort of standardized the French language across the countryside. And so the way he found this out is he rode his bicycle around the French countryside and interviewed people and asked if he could write down what they talked about. Like he sat in their living room and listened to them. And he spent years doing this, 10 or 12 or 15 years or something insane. And of course, people were not standardizing on their language, even though the printing press had standardized it, but that's not really here or there. He got, this very tiny slice of language for a very particular point in time, right? It's really, really difficult to do. There's just not a lot of good ways
I'm going to interject, Ben, because I actually have an awesome point. If you have not read the book, The Dictionary of Lost Words, by Pip Williams, have you read that book?
No.
It's about the original dictionary and how they decided what words to put in the dictionary, and like it's fascinating. I think you would enjoy it.
I would enjoy it, absolutely. That's a huge problem as well, right? Like dictionaries, prescriptivism versus descriptivism, and all that. And
there were like in the protagonist is a woman, and there were like words that were used like mainly by women or that weren't included because they couldn't find enough references in like standard material to include them. That's I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's a fascinating book.
I will read that. That sounds great. Yeah, because we just don't ever have, so we don't really know. We don't have a good way to research or study or understand how people talk and communicate, day to day, until, right? Like, I mean, even if you think about recording, like we were talking about here, that made it a lot easier to capture informal communication, but still kind of expensive. You need equipment. People generally tend to know when they're being recorded and change the way they speak and act and everything.
You make a fair point, because if you hear somebody who's recorded and they didn't know it, it's far less
very different.
It's far less organized or far less
right. It sounds almost stream of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Until the big thing that changed, that I very artfully led you towards concluding. So there was this little thing that happened late at the end of the last century called the internet. The internet and the computer revolution more generally, suddenly, almost overnight, right, if you lived through it, which we all did, made it so that all of us could speak to every single one of us all the time, always at a cost of effectively zero. Just constant informal communication, right? And on top of that, storage cost for this became effectively nil. So we were storing and recording all of this informal communication, all of these chat groups, all these forum posts, all this stuff that we just kind of do and toss off when we're in a Slack message together, lives for eternity. It's still out there on the internet. It's crazy sometimes. You can go back things that are 40, 50 years old, and it still lives there. And all of it's just gathered and collected. Plus, linguists now, not only is it all gathered and collected, but databases and computers can scrub it, and they can research it and understand it, with algorithms. They don't have to go through it hand by hand. So that all really changed how we understood informal communication, and it changed how we used informal communication, because suddenly it wasn't just a verbal thing. We were committing this communication using, well, in our case, keyboards, right? And so one of the first things that happened was internet jargon, lead speak. The file that I looked up was dated 1977, and it was like a short little dictionary of internet jargon with things like the letter R, the letter U for RU, BTW, FYI, those were labeled in there, right? For by the way.
I see.
Yeah, so right, we started coming up with these shorthand words for things because we weren't doing formal communication.
Okay, I see. That was the joke.
It's got to be better than that, Sean, if I'm going to get it.
Oh, okay. I see you too. I mean, come on, we were all 12.
So that's what kind of led into this idea of, hey, we need to start using, or we're understanding language a little differently, and also we needed to start using it differently, because we needed a way to be informal and casual and fast. A later version of the file from 1990 had a lot of the acronyms that we recommend, LOL and BRB and ROFL, LMAO, all that good stuff, all that fun stuff. Plus a whole lot of stylistic things that went into this. For instance, do you type LOL in all caps or all lowercase?
Yeah, they each mean something different in my mind.
And they feel, they each mean something different in your mind.
All caps means I actually laughed out loud.
LOL, good job. Yeah.
And LOL is like this softening thing, right? That's just you might.
All lowercase is like acknowledgement.
Yeah. I mean, if your boss sent you a text that was like, hey, you're 10 minutes late, that feels a little tough. If it's, hey, you're 10 minutes late, LOL, you're like, oh, okay, we're all good here, right?
Capital L, lowercase o, lowercase l means you did it on your phone.
Yeah.
One of my first jobs When I was spending a lot of time with command line prompts, I I would wind up sending messages all in caps because it was faster. Like we were troubleshooting something, and I still remember the conversation of being taken aside and saying, you got to hit that caps lock, lady." Like you're yelling at
You're
everybody, and
yelling at people.
it was just an efficiency thing. I knew we were all working like with caps lock, and it I had to be taught.
And yet, we all consider that all caps. If you saw something written out like that, that's the phrase you'd use to describe it, all caps.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anyone that would call it block letters? Because there's a generation, arguably right before ours, that calls them block letters, and they don't mean shouting at all.
Are the three of us, Ben, are you Gen X? Are we all Gen X?
I'm elder millennial, almost Gen X. I'm like in that in
Okay.
between 1979.
Danielle, I'm not asking your age. That's an inappropriate
72.
question. We're around there, so
Yeah.
okay. All right. I was just
Yeah.
curious there. Generational speaking. We're close. It was just, the weird border is close to,
Yeah. No, I'm the in between, elder millennial, the forgotten generation, the best, whatever it is.
Yeah, I've heard.
I'm the
I've heard it both
generation that
ways.
was forgotten but doesn't care.
So yeah, like all caps, versus lowercase, right? That's meaningful. And it's important when you think about this, like we're already talking about how these things, there's rules about how these should be used.
Yeah.
It changes the meaning of them, just changing it from caps to lowercase. LOL, we all know, of course, is not meant laughing out loud for anyone literally in a long time, but we still use it all the time because it has in effect become what's called a pragmatic marker. So again, side switch, hold that conversation aside. There is an idea in written language about typographical tone of voice, which is fancy word of saying the same thing that we've all noted before. It's tough to understand what people mean in an email, right, or in a text. Oh, did they mean that funny, or were they being a jerk, right? You lose all this meaning when it's just written out into text. Well, if you are writing formal communication, if you're transcribing a poem, you get to spend a lot of time thinking about the exact words you want to use, how you're going to arrange them, where the commas are going to go, all that stuff to really effectively evoke your meaning. Same thing in a letter, right? All these things. But if you're just hammering away in Slack or in AOL Instant Messenger or whatever, particular thing you happen to use, you need to think about how you convey that tone of voice, that emotion. Are you being harsh? Are you being mean? So John McWhorter, in one of his books, he does this really cool thing. He asks the reader, and I'll ask it to you guys here, to consider the sentence, horses run fast. Okay. And if I asked you to define each of the words in that sentence, do you think you could?
I believe I could.
Yeah. Most of us.
I feel like I'm being tricked here, so
I know. Exactly right. Like I'm being set up again. Yeah. But you're not. Right. Again, even if I were trying to set you up or trick you, we all feel comfortable. We could look up in the dictionary, horses run and fast, and we could, display a definition for each of those words. But now consider a slight variation on that sentence. Well, horses run fast. Same question. Define each word in that sentence.
Yeah, I see the well as more of a.
It's interesting, right? It's still a word. No one disagrees it's a word. It's got a
understood.
definition. We could go to the dictionary and look it up.
Yeah.
Right? It means I did well, or a hole in the ground where you get water out of. But none of those are what we mean here. So you could imagine that sentence being in reply to something that someone else, like kid, was like, I bet lions eat horses all the time. And you're like, well, horses run fast. And in that case, what it's doing is it's sort of acknowledging what that person said. Sort of politely saying, okay, yeah, I know what you mean, but I'm about to contradict what you're going to say. And it's interesting that when I say that, and I think we all agree that's what it's doing there, is that we stopped talking about what it means and we started talking about what that word is doing. Because there are words and sounds in all languages, English and otherwise, that do things. They are part of the grammar, like punctuation. They are called pragmatics in the world of linguistics. And it's this whole area of grammar that we don't bother to learn in school for whatever reason, probably because it's boring. So there's a lot of our language that goes into that. All of the connective words, I just said so at the beginning of my sentence, pragmatics. When people are dropping likes into their sentences, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is like really like a thing. The word like there is operating as a pragmatic marker. and it's adding tone of voice to the thing that's being said, softening. So when you think about words, you think about what they're doing as opposed to what they mean. You're thinking about grammar and you're thinking about pragmatics. And this is where dialing back to like LOL. Have you heard of the different what's the like initiatives to get an irony punctuation mark in the language? So people are always like, we need a way to mark irony in language and written language. We need a new punctuation mark.
People to understand irony first. Because we're not there.
It's like rain on your wedding day. It's easy. So
yeah. I think we need sarcasm markers before we need irony.
We do. We need lots of these markers. And you know what's interesting is that lowercase LOL fills that function for us all of the time.
Yeah.
All sorts of these things that we do with the
or
language.
/S, for
/S. That's a great one that's become popular recently, right? Think of the number of exclamation points that show up in your texts, in your emails, because without an exclamation point, it's passive aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
They're ubiquitous. One of my favorite.
I'm a big emoticon, which is precursor to emojis or whatever, to portray tone. If I'll end a lot of sentences or text messages with colon close parentheses because I want to make sure, like, okay, this is a jovial message that I'm sending.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where I'm going with this whole conversation, right? As I get into emojis.
Did I ruin it good?
Yeah, you totally
jumped right ahead.
Good.
It's over. I'm calling it a day. No, I wanted to bring up another one here. Am I sharing my screen?
You are now.
It looks like you're starting to.
Yeah. Can you explain the whelp to me? Where well has evolved to WELP?
I mean, other than it's just become kind of a shorthand for like a shrug, right? Like,
okay.
Not just well, but like whelp. That's the way it goes.
Do you know where
that hard T on the end? I mean, words. The sound of words and the way they're used change all the time. Like that whole aspect of how language changes over time, and younger people change it in particular a lot in order to identify themselves as belonging to an in-group while not belonging to the elder group of old people. Can you see my screen?
No.
If your screen is existentially blackness for a reason, then yes.
There it is.
Yes. You can see it now.
All right. So, have you ever heard of a key smash?
I have
Only
not.
because it's on the screen right now.
A key smash is when you're like typing in a chat message or a text or an SMS or whatever, and you just want to hammer on some keys to like express frustration or surprise or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, do either of these two key smashes look better or more like a key smash than the other?
Yeah, definitely the second one.
The second one,
Why?
Because it's lazier.
It's not. I can assure you, I put the exact same amount of effort into both of those.
Just the whole.
Too many comments in the top one.
But you had to move your hands off the home row to do the first one. That was a little bit more effort.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So I got this one from Gretchen McCulloch, and she talked about it in her book Because Internet. How do I stop sharing here? End my screen share.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about the fact she took like an informal poll online of people, and she was like, do you ever go back and erase your key smash because it doesn't look right? And an overwhelming majority of people said yes. Yes, I do. Because, and it's supposed to just be random hammering on the keys. But like Sean said, that first one had periods and commas because I moved my hands down a row and I did a key smash on the wrong row. And it only looks right when it's letters that are primarily from the home row. That looks like a better key smash. It looks more like what it's intended to convey. So even when we're just hammering on letters willy-nilly on the keyboard, we are invoking meaning in these things that we type in. So that's typographical tone of voice. Again, we need these things inside of our language, inside of our written language especially, and it's especially helpful when it's fast and easy to do because informal communication is fast and easy and off the hook. And it bleeds into our everyday language as well. My daughter, who's 8, will now, when she's like leaving the room, she gets up and she says AFK. out loud to us, which for those who don't know is an internet term that means away from keyboard. And it's a thing that you would type into because you wanted to, people can't see you on an internet chat room that you've gotten up and left your keyboard. You don't want them to think you're rude if they start chatting at you and you don't respond. So you politely say AFK to let them know where you're going to be gone. And when you're back, you say I'm back or whatever. Again, we're talking about this word, if you want to call it a word, AFK is doing a thing. I mean, it has a meaning, but what's important about it is what it's doing. So there's lots of language that falls under that, which leads us all up to emojis, the worst of the worst. Friggin' emojis, smiley faces and crying faces.
Before we go there, a couple things. One, Apple released a couple new emojis today or yesterday or whatever. But how much of grammatical errors do you think form a writer's voice? And I say that because like I have a very clear voice, and I've written a lot. I used to write professionally, and so if you read something that I wrote, you can, if you've read my stuff, you can, oh yeah, Sean wrote that. And a lot of it's because I make the same purposeful errors a lot, but I use ellipses too much. I put side thoughts in parentheticals too much. All those things, but I do it purposefully because it has become my voice.
Ellipses are another great one, actually. They show up a lot, in particular, like if you have any older relatives or friends who aren't super tech savvy, you see a lot of dots in their text messages to you. When your kid text messages you, if they have 3 sentences, it's one sentence, send, no punctuation. Yep. Second sentence, send, no punctuation. Third sentence, send, no punctuation. Because that's how they, and to a large extent we as well, grew up communicating on the internet, typing into a chat box in a chat room. But older people, or people who are less tech savvy or came to this later, use dots a lot. And it turns out that is not a computer thing. That also shows up in linguistic research, historical linguistic research, notably on postcards. And what are postcards? Informal communication. It's communication. We're limited on space and we don't think about much what we're saying. It's just kind of friends and family communication. So those
I love that piece of information. Well. Yeah.
So my style has often been referred to as real. Do you think that means my writing style is more informal? So people
probably, yeah, I think
conversational.
So. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks, Ben.
I also take issue with the whole notion of a grammatical error, but
yeah, and honestly, I mean, I know you jokingly say that, but I do too. I mean, art is in the inconsistencies, art is in the errors, and yeah, I think that if we are conveying meaning with the grammatical errors that may go against the rules that we were taught, we're doing a job with it. So it's relaying the ideas, and so art is in the imperfections. That was the
art is in the imperfections. Yeah, no, I largely I take issue with it because if your meaning was conveyed and construed, if people understand what you meant, what more does it really need to be, right? I mean, and eventually the mistake or the error that you're making in your grammar may well become the accepted standard.
Except though, at that point,
every single word we have in our language was once wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, if it becomes standard and the tool you are using to get your point across was the error, or
then you would change again.
The non-traditional usage, then you have to change it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure, it's an ongoing cycle, right? None of this is static. One of the books that I used, that I read in my research up to this, is called Words on the Move, and that's literally the name of the book, by John McWhorter, who's awesome. He's really funny. But all that brings us up to, because we're going to run way overboard here, so emojis, which a lot of people think come from emoticons, right? You just brought that up a moment ago, and you like to use emoticons. Even though I think you've expressed some, to me offline, you've expressed some discomfort with emojis.
Only a couple.
Okay, specific ones.
Only one.
Not their general usage.
No, not general usage. No, it's
upside down face.
Yeah, because it to me it seems goofy and like a smiley face that's like standing on its head. But it's everybody who sends it to me, i.e., my kids, who are in their 20s but still my kids,
Yeah, and don't like
It's
you very
clearly not meant to be a funny thing. It's like a very unhappy kind of,
much. All right, let's put a pin in that because I want to come back
okay.
to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that'll help clarify what it
emoticons.
means. A
Sorry,
pain in
again,
it.
operating under the assumption that maybe there's like some real young people that might listen to this at some point in the future. Emoticons are the punctuation that we make on our keyboard. They came out of Western culture, Western computer culture, which of course was sort of the genesis of modern computer culture and internet culture. And it's a colon with a parenthesis to be a sideways smiley face, or you put a dash in between to add a nose
Yeah,
in if you
are
want.
you a dash or an asterisk person
I
in a
am
smiley or
not.
no?
No, I'm a colon
I'm a two
parenthesis.
Yep.
character. Yeah,
Yeah,
same.
sure.
Yeah.
The faster and easier it is, the better, right? And I think you largely seen like they're still used a little bit, but like no one really does the nose anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
never did, but yeah, I do.
So those, of course, started as in the 1970s as well, when people were first started
Okay.
communicating online, using for exactly the reason that you just described, Sean. They add a little bit of typographical tone of voice to the
Mhm.
communications that people are sending back and forth. These sort of informal communications. But what happened on the other side of the pond in Asia, as computers became big over there, they needed to do the same thing. Were not without this need. And what they developed were called cowmoji, which you have seen even if you've never heard of them, or if you have never heard that
Yes.
word.
Yep.
These are cowmoji. So
Okay.
these are of largely Japanese and Eastern Asian creation.
This is like for people who are just listening. These are like the string of ASCII characters that make like a shrugging
Yeah, the
face,
shruggy guy,
shrugging
right?
shoulders. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
table flip person.
Mhm.
And there's some cool stuff going on here. Like these emoji focus much more on the eyes, and that's just a
Yeah.
cultural thing, Eastern
I'll use
cultures.
so one of these that I use is a capital O period lowercase o for like a
Yes,
cockeyed look.
yeah,
That's one that I'll
exactly,
do.
right. The eyes are like the thing
Yeah.
that are important there. Have you ever used the shruggy
No.
Kamoji? By the way, Kamoji
Never.
Kamoji stands for picture word, I believe it is, or picture
Okay.
character is what that means. Um, so sorry, you said you had used the shruggy.
No.
Have you
It's
ever
too
used
many
any of
characters.
these?
I don't know how to make it happen.
Well, okay, all right. Yeah, you don't know how to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to type these, right? And that's
Yes.
kind of what happened very, very quickly. They didn't have special fancy keyboards with 600 characters on them
Hmm.
in Japan. So people over there did the same thing that we would do here when we want to use one of these, which is they would search it up and then highlight and cut and paste it into whatever they were typing
Ah.
up,
All
which is
right.
a huge pain in the butt. But also like on-screen keyboards that they used on early phones would
Mm-hmm.
have pop-ups of these characters that they could search through and spin through and find them and choose them, which ought to sound a little bit familiar to you.
They certainly do. I was going to see if we're heading that direction.
Yeah, because these are what kind of turned into the emoji that we know and love today. It was.
I was even thinking gifts. I mean, the way in which,
That's part of the conversation too.
yeah.
GIFs.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
oh,
Team Soft G.
yeah, them.
GIFs or GIFs are a part of this as well, right? And
Mhm.
it's interesting, but like they've done some studies on this. The most popularly used GIFs
Mhm.
are faces, overwhelmingly overrepresented in GIFs and memes that people post. Like faces are where it's at, right? Because that's a
Yeah.
lot of what these are ultimately doing. These
Expressing
emoji
emotion.
are expressing emotion, right?
Yeah.
And they're adding that typographical tone of voice to the things that we're talking about. The emoji themselves grew from that Asian culture. There's a whole thing about how they standardized with Unicode, which
Mm.
is kind of really, really important because like the early ways this work, I don't know if you know this, but you don't send pictures back and forth like when you send emojis back and forth. That's too much data. That takes
Yeah,
up too
you
much
send
space.
broken Unicode boxes
Yeah, right. Boxes.
because you don't
You
have
send
enough.
a code, and then the receiving system knows what that code is meant to be. Well,
Or it
before
doesn't.
Unicode took this stuff over and started doing this, every provider kind of had their own standard
Mhm.
for it, right? And so you might send a dancer that on your phone looked like a salsa dancer, and the person might receive like a Spanish dancer guy with a rose in his mouth. And that was kind of a problem. People were like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I meant to send. That means something way different.
Yeah.
And so when Gretchen was researching emojis and trying to figure out and understand this stuff a little better, she ended up trying to catalog some emojis and talk about what they meant. So like thumbs up and the okay sign and a smile. And she was talking to a friend of hers, another linguist, who had done some gesture research in her linguistics academic career, and she was like, "Oh, she's like, what you're describing are emblems." And Gretchen was like, "What? What do you emblems? What are you talking about?" And she's, "Yeah." She's like, "When we talk about gestures and hand gestures and speaking, there's different kinds of gestures. They're not all just gestures." She said, "So, for example, many gestures are emblems. They're very specific. They're very cultural often, right? But what's important about gestures is they are very, very specific. If you get them wrong, they don't look right. Because if I come along and I'm like, hey guys, right? Like it looks ridiculous that I'm doing. For those who are only listening, I'm giving them the middle finger, but I'm facing my hand the wrong way. Because that's a gesture. It has to be done this way.
Much better.
Thank you.
To have
much better. Thank you.
the proper meaning. And it turns out that for emojis, some
that
emojis
make you feel at home in New York, Danielle?
Yeah. So it turns out that for some emojis, again, that was really, really important, and that's why
Can you explain the how this versus this
the
has
up arrow with the hands facing the different way?
Yeah.
I cannot.
I
don't know.
The pointing up, which is correct, and this, which is just half of an "I love you." I don't even know what that is.
It's entirely possible that the half of "I love you" that you're talking about is important in some other culture, some other place that we don't understand.
The thumb sticking out. All right.
Yeah, or that the Utes know what it means and we don't. So a lot of these these gestures tend to have names. Yeah, right. Like you got the loser in the forehead. Gestures tend to have names, right? We tend to be able to refer to them explicitly. And that's why the dancer emoji had to be standardized, right? But that's not all emojis. And think about, and again, stop and think about all the rules we're talking about here about emoji usage and when you send them, right? And what they mean, and why it's important to not just willy-nilly throw an eggplant emoji out and about. And why they fought very, very, very hard to get and keep the smiling poop emoji in the Unicode standard.
Really?
Yeah. No, what is that story? I know that it was hard fought.
The story is basically that it's an important symbol to include, and it's the sort of general original meaning behind it that they talked about is it means a bit shitty. Sorry for my language, right? That's just kind of what it means. And the smile is really, really important. Again, when they tried to roll it out without the smile, that's not what people wanted. They want it with the smile. It's got to have the happy smiley face. So there's all kinds of these different things, and there's all sorts of rules for using them, right? Like, you might repeat a bunch of emoji in a response to a text. Heart, 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 heart. You might use just random emoji. Sometimes you don't care what the emoji symbol is, right? You're wishing someone a happy birthday. You just fire off cakes and candles and presents, and
is there concern that the speed at which language and communication is evolving will make archival history difficult for the future? I just, it's going so fast. Like, I just wonder if
they can read the Dead Sea Scrolls, they can figure out what a pile of shit means.
Well, but that's the thing, the Dead Sea Scrolls probably meant the same thing for hundreds of years, whereas, the eggplant emoji might have meant eggplant for a while and then clearly doesn't. And I mean, just things move so quickly, and I don't know that it's, I mean, are there things being documented, current meanings of, and when this was written or communicated? And
when you were first describing when you were intro going through everything at the beginning, Ben, do you know those graphics of #1 chart topping songs over the last century or last few decades, and there's the animated things that you see? I was imagining, I want that visual for what's happened to language, and I have no idea what something like that would look like, but the fluidity of what you were describing,
middle finger emojis.
Well, but what was seen as offensive and a degradation of language to any one of the historical quotes that you had talked about previously, and just, the speed at which it's continued to change and evolve, not necessarily degrade, but just really the changes that have happened and the speed with which I would love to see something like that mapped out.
To Sean, to your question, I don't know. I haven't
Yeah.
read anything about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's just the speed that makes me wonder.
I suspect the speed, but also combined with the fact that we've got it all documented. I mean, again, I can go and look up the document from 1977 that says what those acronyms mean and why they were there and why they were put in.
I just wonder if there's that, because the change has happened so quickly. I wonder if, even if it is documented, if it even makes sense. Like for 3 years, this tended to mean this. When was this written? We don't really know. Sometime in this time frame, so it could have meant this, could have meant that, could have meant this, could have meant that.
I mean, we run into that a lot. Like that's there's an element of that in understanding something like Shakespeare.
Okay.
Which, one of the reasons Shakespeare is so difficult for us to understand is not because we don't know the language. You open up a Shakespeare play, you're going to recognize probably 98% of the words in that.
But the in-jokes and
the words themselves have changed what they mean a little bit over time, right? Which makes it harder for us to comprehend because we already have meanings associated with those words. Where if it was written in a language that you just didn't know, like French, and then you were translating it from the French, it would be much easier to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess.
I do get that,
right.
But it's the speed that I wonder
you pick
about.
something up out of a particular moment in time, and you're like, for that window, it meant X.
Yeah.
But
shrink that window by 3 orders of magnitude.
Do you have the context? Do you have the context necessary to make that translation?
Yeah.
I think on the flip side, if it's around for that short of a period of time, it's not going to have been particularly meaningful.
Yeah. And I guess to reference your original point when you started too, a lot of what I'm thinking about is all informal conversation that probably will not be in historical records necessarily. Right. And so, at least not to the point that
and if it's important enough to be understood in the future, it will get retranslated. It'll be talked about. That will
makes sense.
Someone's going to be interested enough to track some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's whole lots of other stuff there.
Yeah.
Trying to find an hour just to shrink it down to an hour. But there's like the repetition thing is really interesting. They did studies on like emojis that are repeated and what patterns they are and are not repeated. Just how differentiated they are from language and from words. Because they are very, very different. They're not replacing language is what it boils down to. The kids aren't going to suddenly wake up one day and not be able to speak or write because all they know how to do is write emojis. They're an important part, an extension of communication that's already happening.
It's almost like a different kind of slang.
They enrich it.
Yeah. Formal, informal. Is there now a third type of language then? Is that sort of what the findings were?
No, this is all just more informal language. And again, like emojis, I don't think the notion that they tie back to gestures and speaking with your hands, I don't think is that unusual to people. Like you don't think that people are worse communicators because they use a lot of hand gestures when they talk, right? And they do this and they do that, and they point over there. I mean, everyone does that. One of the people suggested it's an exercise the next time you're out at a restaurant, find a table on the other side of the restaurant that you definitely cannot hear. And notice that at any point in time, exactly at that table who's speaking. Just from their body language.
And often the mood of the conversation. Not necessarily, but often.
You can pick that up as well.
Yeah.
So like,
and
there's a
maybe
ton
an extension
of communication
of that in a digital world.
What's that?
And an emoji is kind of an extension of that into the digital.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what surprised her so much when she learned about emblems versus gestures, because some gestures don't matter, right? If I was talking to you, I was like, oh yeah, it's just going to be, over and over and over. I could do it like that, or I could do it this way. I could do it this way, right? I could do it with this, right? There's a million different ways that I could add a gesture onto that particular statement, and it doesn't matter. It all means the same thing, and no one would think it was that unusual. As opposed to if I did a thumbs up like this, you'd be like, what? Like all I did was stick my pinky out, but suddenly it looks weird because a thumbs up is a very specific emblem. And emojis
And this
operate
means
the
you're
same.
going surfing, I think.
Yeah, hang 10.
Yeah.
Talk about dating
We're on the phone.
ourselves.
That's right.
Phone. So yeah, the borderline is emojis are cool, and emoticons are cool, and internet leet speak is cool because it is enriching the written version of our language and adding context and things to it. And it absolutely follows rules, just like all language follows rules, and it has important meanings and distinctions, and helps us communicate
but rules
better.
not in just to
The rules
clarify,
are
kind of like
internal. When I say it follows rules, I mean that it has
that they mean things.
self-enforced rules.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Right.
not
Yeah,
like this
they're
is right or
patterns,
this
yeah.
is wrong, but that it has
Yeah.
meaning.
Yeah. Like going back again to repetition, it would not be unusual to see a bunch of birthday cakes in a row at the end of a happy birthday message, right? Happy birthday, and you're like, birthday cake, right?
I
Totally
really
normal.
mean it. Yeah.
Or birthday cake, balloons, party hat, whatever all the different emojis are, right? Totally normal thing. But what if someone was like eggplant, cucumber, banana, right? Like it's hard to imagine a scenario unless you were specifically trying to be funny where that would be a normal.
And even that would be one of the rules. Like, I mean, you have clearly meant to portray either discomfort or humor.
Exactly. Right. So those are sort of self-reinforced rules. They're not rules of grammar, but it's the system itself has rules because we need rules to effectively communicate, but those rules are ones that we apply and sort of collectively decide on without realizing it.
I love this topic.
Yeah,
it's a cool topic.
Yeah, this is really cool.
The books, the three primary sources here for me were Because the Internet by Gretchen McCulloch, which is one of my favorite books. I love that book.
If you can send me links to these, I'll put them in the show notes.
I will. Words on the Move by John McWhorter, who's written a lot. And then Don't Believe a Word by David Shariat Madari. I think I'm saying that right. That was another really good one.
It's weird. This piggybacks into the last podcast I literally just did back-to-back podcasts, and the last one, part of it was talking about accents and geographic like terminology and stuff. And the same sort of thing, the internet has changed so drastically, like regional colloquialisms, because some of the time they're like, okay, how do you say the pie, the holiday pie that is very sweet with nuts on top? Not walnuts.
Pecan pie.
So how do you say that nut, right? And because it's like it's historically been very regional. Pecan, pecan, and I honestly don't know how I say it because I've had that conversation and I've heard it so many different times. I don't know which one is natural for me to say, and it's it's the internet and it's the flattening of the world, not literally.
Right.
But it's interesting.
You heard it here first. Sean's a flat earther.
Yeah.
And I think I added. I think I created 2 new words that within this conversation. So I'm making up words even as I go.
And that's allowed.
That's within the rules. Cromulent thing to do.
Cromulent, which I have used so often, the word cromulent, like in Linux journal writing, like in my professional writing, I use the word cromulent because it's become a cromulent word.
I've used it plenty, and no one's ever not known what I meant.
Yeah, it's a great topic. It's a fun topic, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and there's lots of cool stuff. Cool stuff out there. The flattening of the world thing is interesting too. Are you opening a second one? Sean, these are not good for you. I want to be perfectly clear.
I've been waiting for over a month to try it. It's been in my fridge, like mocking me.
So how much was in that thing of soda that Asher pounded the other day?
The Peeps thing?
60 some odd.
Well,
this has
more than this.
46 grams of sugar.
Yeah, this is a lot.
It has 100 calories in it.
Yeah.
And this only has less than twice that. So.
Less than twice that. Oh no, Sean.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Will I ever get to have Loganberry again? Very unlikely. So.
Fair enough.
Enjoy it.
I won't live long enough. No, that's not why. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, we didn't have Asher this week, so it was great. No, just kidding.
Asher, you have to leave that in.
Yeah, when he's not here, we have to pick on him. That's the rule, even before he was part of it. So yeah, thanks, Ben. Who do we know who's next? It's got to be
me. I think it's me.
And it could have been me because I didn't record, but I really don't want it to be me because I'm still
I don't know that I know enough about anything else to talk for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's not a necessity. You can deep dive on.
Just wait and see what I come up with. I know what I'm talking about, Ben. And you will feel much better about picking any topic after that.
All right.
Well, hey, thank you both. Thanks for everybody for listening. This is actually fun. I'll try to put all the books and stuff in the show notes, and I would put a link to Logan Bear. Maybe I will, but it's not worth the money that you'll have to pay on Amazon to get it.
No, if you can find it locally, go for it. But
or just go find some Freezy Pops and the red flavor.
Frost Freezy Pop.
I don't know that the red flavor will do it. It has that taste, but I don't know what flavor, what flavoring would come closest to it.
I don't think this requires a lot of research. It's they mostly all taste the same anyway. Slight different chemical flavors. Anyway, thanks, and we'll see you in the next.
I did want to leave us on a quote.
Oh, yeah, leave us on a quote. Okay, so next time come back because the smartest one here is going to be talking. And go ahead, Ben.
It'll actually be interesting. So this was from Douglas Adams, and he wrote it about technology, but I think it applies equally well to language and words and things like, the Utes destroying our language. 3 rules to describe our reactions. Anything that is in the world when you are born is normal and ordinary and just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. And anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. So, something to keep in mind next time you want to complain about how people are using language or correct someone's grammar.
Douglas Adams, thanks for all the fish.
Thanks, Doug.